Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar, Trade Show Booth Lighting Design from Start to Finish with Mike Mahoney. My name is Mallory Misnarsic and I'm the project manager here at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during this webinar. However, there is a Q&A function where you can submit questions to the presenter and I'll try to answer as many as possible at the end. This webinar will also be recorded and a link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control. We encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional Training to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Mike, the presenter for today's webinar. Mike is a live entertainment lighting professional with over 30 years of international experience. He is the owner and operator of Mahoney Design, Inc., based out of Chicago, Illinois, and his resume includes everything from concert tours and television to theater and architecture. And now I'll pass it over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Melanie. Thank you very much for that introduction. Delighted to be here. And before we get rolling, I mean, this is going to be pretty loosey-goosey for me, but I did script something because I think it's important to say, and I don't want to miss out. First of all, I want to thank Martin Harman, especially Mallory, Brad, and Laura for putting this all together for us. Since Brad and I talked a few months back, I've watched some of these learning sessions, and I went and I looked to pick through some names and found some people that I knew, and then grabbed onto those first. And of course, I love those guys, and they're great, but there's so many things in there that I just didn't know. So I appreciate that you guys are doing that for free and that you're helping us learn. On a daily basis, I continue to learn stuff. And so I think it's a great opportunity for all of us, and I appreciate that a lot. And thank you to anybody that's here today or watching later, because it means you care about your industry and you care about the craft. And of course, that's why we're all here. And then I'll read this because I don't want to mess it up because it's important. We're going through some serious times here. I would also like to thank everyone interested enough to the craft. I told you that. And I think that this can't go any further without seriously hoping that everyone is safe and healthy. The pandemic has touched all of us in one way or another. And I'm happy to report that our family has had few cases of COVID, but none of them real seriously. So I honestly hope for everybody out there that you're COVID-free and that you're safe and healthy. And if anybody in your family or anybody you know has passed away, I'm truly, truly, truly sorry. I'm going to do a little slideshow, and I'll just tell you about where I was when I got the first COVID call to stop. So it's gratuitous, but enjoy. So on March 3rd, I was in Orlando, and I was about to unload 3 semis worth of gear for a show, and my client called and said, don't unload the trucks. We got to talk. I'll call you guys later today or tomorrow, and we'll sit down, we'll have a meeting. And the next thing I knew, we were pulling out of the show. Now, at that point, the show was still going on. Trump was actually the keynote speaker because it was a medical show, and he wanted to tell everybody that we were okay. And remember, this is March 3rd. So I was surprised. I didn't think it was that devastating yet. And the next thing I knew, I was on a plane the next day. And by the time I got to O'Hare Airport, the whole show had canceled. So it came quick, it came fast for our industry. And I haven't worked since March 3rd. I mean, I've done some part-time stuff, but I haven't really worked since March 3rd. And I honestly thought when it happened that I'd be back to work in a couple of months. So just another side of the pandemic that's been brutal on our industry. So presentation of goals. My hope is to give you a snapshot of what it takes to design any size trade show, from basically start to finish, and understanding that so much of this goes into the design before we even put a lighting fixture on the plot. And what I mean is for me, and I don't want to talk down anybody that's done this a million times, but for me, this is a little system that works. There's a million ways to do what I do, but this works for me, and a lot of it is done before I even start the design process. So what you see here is the discovery booth. That's one of the very first trade show booths I did. This isn't it. It was much smaller at the time. But it was my first client and I had a lot to learn. I really screwed up the first show and mostly about orientation. So when I talk about orientation, you'll know why. I had the booth facing the wrong way. And my client said, do you want this gig or not? So I learned fast what it takes to be ready before I even hit the trade show floor. So we'll move along this somewhat smoothly, I hope. The procedures for design, I mean, I've kind of broke it down in simple steps, communication, budget, equipment, crew, travel, orientation, layout, design, labeling and information, and then the final design, the okay, the go ahead. And we'll break those down. I'll make it much simpler for you to understand. What you see here is the Titleist booth that I designed. Now, this is an all conventional rig. It's hard to see, but it's an all conventional design because that's what they've asked for. And here's a picture of it when it's done. But I try to design it with automated wherever I can, whenever I can. But they like that look. And honestly, I think for them, it's perfect. So moving on, step one, communication. Talk and listen to the client directly. It's important to understand that listening part, and I'll explain. That took me a long time to figure out. Find the highest person in the chain of command. And what I mean by that is I've been burned. I don't want to say drastically, but I've talked to somebody that wasn't the person with the vision, and the show never seemed to go right. So I've always since then tried to find the producer or the assistant producer or the creative that is in charge of the overall final look that's going to take that to his boss or the main client and try to get their ideas or their vision of what they want so that I know that I'm not missing anything. Go to them in person if possible. So in other words, if you can set up a meeting now, I didn't know what Zoom was a year ago. I had no idea. Now that's a great way to do what we do, to see the person face to face and talk to them. But try to go to them in person, put your face in front of their face. I think it's helpful. Go to the meeting with an open mind. It's simple. I might have a thought, and we'll talk about that in a second, but that might be nowhere near what they're thinking. Although I'm creative and they hired me to be their creative, I have to remember they may take me in a different direction right from the start. So go to the meeting with a few ideas. And so that's exactly that. It's go there with the thought process, come up with a couple ideas. Don't go in there just expecting them to tell you what they want and then just roll with it. Go with them to take them possibly in a direction, the vision that you've got from what you've seen so far. Before you say anything other than hello, listen. And I think that's important. It took me a long time to understand that I've never lost an account by listening, but I have by saying too much. And so listening is a skill. I'm still working on it, but it's a key in developing a relationship, especially with creatives. Make sure you ask as many questions as needed to fully understand your client's creative goals. Simply said, understand when you're there and when you leave that meeting, what your next, what you're going to be doing in the next week or two to get this thing ready to roll. Make sure you understand how much money your client has set aside for lighting and your role as a designer. Now that breaks up into two parts. So sometimes it's vague information, but you can usually tell right away. They may not give you the number, but they'll give you maybe a percentage or of an idea how much they want to spend on lighting. So you can figure out right away, is lighting a huge impact for this, or is it a smaller impact? Is my job primarily to lift their scenic elements, or is it truly to light the booth? And they'll tell you. They may not give you a number, but they'll give you an idea. And if you're blessed enough to have long-term clients, they'll say the same as last year, or they'll say something that gives you a true basis. And then what I say is, as your role as a designer, it's important to remind them that you want to be part of the team, that you want to be part of the creative, and that you're there to take their creative and mold it into what lighting can do for them, and hopefully be part of the team. And leave the meeting with your client having complete confidence in you. It's easier said than done, but the goal is, if you've listened and you know what they want, leave them telling them that you got it, and that you're good to go. And even if you're not 100% sure, let them feel comfortable in knowing that you understand what they want and you're good to go. I know that seems common sense, but it's important for them to get it. Budget. But we're going to talk a little bit about budget. It's boring. It's nothing to do with design, right? But it is everything to do with how far you can go and how much you can do. Budget includes everything in your design process. So it's from that first call, that first meeting and on. So how much can I bill for pre-production? So pre-production is a word I use, and I'll talk about it more as we move on. I use it more than the word design fee. And I found that our clients don't really want to pay for design fees, which is strange to me, but they understand the word pre-production and they're willing to roll with pre-production. I mean, that's everything from Zoom calls to parking. They don't want to see all that, but parking, tolls, Zoom meetings, time equals money, right? So everything that goes into paperwork and everything before you show up on site is pre-production, and you sort of have to be smart on how you build pre-production. Not everybody wants to pay a flat fee, so you need to be able to explain to them how much goes into pre-production costs and not design fee costs. Who will the vendor be? Important relationships, right? So I can't tell you how blessed I've been to work with companies like, Pete's and Christie's, and primarily Upstaging, where I worked for a while, and the relationships with other companies like Brown Note and Four Wall and people like that have really saved my butt. And so kind of having an idea of who I'm going to use ahead of time is important. And we're going to get into all of this. It's, is the vendor local, or is he from out of town? Is he, I know for a fact that one of my favorite go-tos is Upstaging, and I know for a fact that their equipment will work, but I can't always afford to use them because they're based out of the Midwest. They're based out of Chicago area where I live. And if I'm doing a show in LA, that's a lot of money. Or a show in Orlando, I mean, trucks are costing a lot of money, and we'll get into all that. But who will the vendor be? So it's all about relationships there. It's also thinking about distance. It's also thinking about who the people are. What gear will I use? Will it be conventional? Will it be automated? And for me, it's always automated if the budget asks for it. Like I showed you that Titleist booth, it's all conventional. They are one of the biggest companies in golf, and they're also one of the most controlling when it comes to budget, especially lighting, because I'm an add-on. And so what I've been able to do is save them money by going conventional. And because it's in Orlando, and because I'm dealing with a great supply house down there, ASI, and their people, I'm able to use lifts and the crews in Orlando, and we're able to get a lot done that you might not be able to get done in New York. So I have to think about all that. So I'm thinking, am I going to go conventional? Am I going to go automated? What am I going to do, and how am I going to do that as I'm moving through this? Will my lights be automated or conventional? That's exactly what I'm talking about. We just discussed it. So it's pretty straightforward. What can I afford to use? How much power draw will it have? All that other stuff. And who's my crew going to be? And that's more of a personal thing. I love my go-to guys. I love some of the independents that I work with on that Titleist booth. There's some guys in Orlando that I use, and they know who they are. And then I bring some guys in from Chicago, Mike Walker and some of the other guys that I work with a lot. And I just know them. I know what they like to do at the gig. I know what they like to eat. I know what they like to do when they're off the gig. Some of them, enjoy baseball games. Some of them enjoy playing golf. And that's what I'm explaining here. Will my crew be from the vendor or from the independent, or will they be independent contractors? And this is what we're going to talk about next. It's about cost. I have to think about, first of all, my relationships with these people, and here we go. What will the travel costs be? So in other words, can I get my independents? Let's say the show's in Vegas. My independents are from Florida or Chicago. Can I afford to fly them in there? What will those costs be? Where's the gear going to come from? What will the cost be? And we'll get into that in a little more detail as we move through this. And that's what I'm saying here. How will I get everyone to the job and everything to the job? And so as we go into the next slide, we're talking about vendor relationships. This is what I mean. And that's why I've been blessed to work with people, for a long time. And so I really know who I feel comfortable with. And, but I've been surprised. I've been very surprised by working with companies that I've never heard of or worked with, and they've been outstanding. And so you never know. That's the open mind part, right? So, and Brad, I've had 3 cups of coffee. So if I get a little kooky or I get a little too fast, chime in and rope me down, will you? So I feel good now.
You're doing great, Mike. Keep going.
Okay. I don't want to get too wacky here. So pre-production limits and vendor relationships. Can't stress it enough. How much can I bill for pre-production? All pre-production such as drawings, Zoom meetings, phone calls, site surveys, supplies are included in pre-production expenses. As it says on the left here, time equals money. And that's what that's all about. We touch base on that, and we know now that relationship is going to be important. And I'm calling it pre-production versus design fees. Some clients don't fully grasp the design process and want you as a designer, what you bring to the table. They don't care so much. That's sort of a given. That's why they hired you. It's your creative based on the client's vision, and some clients don't want to pay for that. And I mean that with all due respect. I understand that. And that's why I call it pre-production, and I keep very close eye on everything I do from the time I get to the call to the time that I show up on the show floor. And we talked about this already, but who will the lighting vendor be? And that's your relationship with the vendor will save you tons of time. Understanding that you both need to work together seamlessly to pull off a great show is vital. Knowing they have the fixtures you like and the gear will work out of the box is a huge time saver. And I can't say that enough. I've worked with companies, they will remain nameless, where you hire them. There's no money for prep. The gear shows up in boxes unlabeled. And if I'm in Chicago or New York, Philadelphia, and I have to start with my crew off to the side, well, let's just say the rigging's going on, and start labeling cables and marking things, I'm in a lot of trouble. I'm already behind. So having a company, that will do pre-production work, labeling, getting everything ready, understands what it takes. So when you hit the floor running. There's no wasted time spent on a show floor prepping a system and then hoping, fingers crossed, that when you fire up the rig, everything turns on. So let's talk a little more about lighting fixtures, because that's important. What gear will I use? We've kind of talked about this, but in a closer look at it, consider the building's power locations, power drops in booth location, AC rack locations. All those things should come first. Run a quick power draw to make sure you have what you need and the cost of the power from the venue. And I know this seems a little excessive, but it doesn't have to be totally detailed, but it will give you an idea. Let's just say I'm looking at a quote, and I'm going to show you this in a minute, and it's costing $9,000 to $10,000 for a power drop. And then depending on the size of the power drop, it could cost even more. And I'll get into that. So I'm considering power draw as I'm deciding which lighting fixtures I want to use. And then we've talked about this, but the budget will drive this decision. Will it be automated or conventional? I prefer all automated fixtures when the budget allows. Understanding what my vendor has in stock is important. After I have a conception of what I want the booth to look like, and I feel like I can make my decision on gear. So in other words, is the booth going to be changing? Is it going to be bright and white, or is it going to be moody? Does it need color? Does the client not know and has said to you in the pre-production meeting, I don't know yet. I think our branding color is blue, but there's a point here during the day that I might want the booth to go yellow. So, okay, well, right now I'm figuring out a way to tell them how to use automated fixtures so that I can make that happen, and that it'll cost a little more, but I can make that happen. And then we'll talk about crew, which I've already touched on, but it's really important to discuss what crew will I have. I prefer my go-tos as I just, my independent contractors, mostly because of familiarity and knowing their strengths and weaknesses is helpful. Understanding the system that I will design will help me decide who I will call. And in other words, if I'm needing media servers or I'm needing content designers or whatever, I have to think about that ahead of time. Those are specialists. They're probably going to have to do two things. You're probably going to have to hang lights and then move over. Do I need a programmer? Is it an MA? Is it a hog? And what I mean is, those are the two lighting consoles that we primarily are using in our industry, the Grand MA or the whole hog. And they both come a long way. I'm a hog guy. Everybody that knows me knows that. They've been pushing me to program MAs for a long time. So I've been learning, but I don't need a howitzer. Sometimes I need a fly swatter. I don't need a $40,000, $50,000 light board. I can get a much more affordable console that'll fit into a closet or a cabinet that is just as powerful for what I need it to do. I need to understand what console I'm going to have so I can decide who's going to be my programmer and so on. And it goes into detail, and it's all pretty much common sense. What is the size of the booth and what do I need my crew to do? And that's usually how I make my decision there. Will the crew, they be from the vendor, or will they be independent contractors? The budget drives this decision. The budget is tight. I may need to rely on a vendor for a crew. This can save money if they are local and don't need the flights and hotels. And I mean, that's pretty straightforward, right? So if I'm in Denver and they can't afford me to fly a crew and hotel a crew, then I will ask the local vendor if they have somebody to cover it. In most of the times, I'll always try to be there for load in, but I can't always be there for load out. So it's important that I trust them, and I'm relying on the project manager from the vendor to tell me that whoever they're sending has got my back. That's important. And then finally, and most important, treat your crew with respect. It's taken me a long time. I won't tell you that I'm perfect at this. It's I pissed off some people over the years, and I paid heavily for it. It's a small industry, right? It's not. I mean, we all kind of know each other. It's everything's word of mouth, and it's really important that I remember that one day the guy that's pulling cable for me or my master electrician, in a month, I could be working for them. I might get a call to program a show or do something, and they may be my boss. And if I was not respectful and kind to that person, how do you think they're going to treat me when I'm working for them? Or I may not even get the gig because they'll remember. So it's taken me a long time to realize how important kindness and empathy is. And it's key. It's key in all relationships, but it's absolutely key in our business because we are a small community of people, and we basically work word of mouth. So travel, kind of touched on it. Let's go through it. How will I get myself and the crew to the show? Travel and logistics can be a deal breaker if not handled correctly. Booking flights, hotel rides is a skill of its own, and that's why we have travel agents. Personally, I'm my own travel agent. I do 90% of my own travel bookings. Why give the money to a third party? I got some notes on this. I think it's funny, and I want to share it because it's key. So in booking, it used to be once upon a time that everybody would share a room. And that was a much tighter sort of scenario, and it was rare. But now everybody gets their own rooms, and everybody likes their own airlines because they have their miles and so on. So it's courteous to ask what hotels and air miles they use. It's not mandatory, but if I can, I always try to get them on their flights that they can use their miles for. I think that's important, and it's a courteous thing to do when you're able to do it. And a lot of times the client will book travel, and that's fine too, because then it's not part of my budget; it becomes part of theirs. How will I get the gear to the show? Understand how many trucks and what size will need to make sure that your vendor does a bill of lading. So you have an idea of weight. Make sure you have all trucks, drivers' cell phone numbers. Your job will come to a screeching halt if the driver is not in the loading dock on time. Let's unpack that a little bit. Trucks are expensive. Chicago to Orlando right now is for a semi is somewhere in the $10,000 range. I could be wrong. I don't know if that's changed, but it could be. Then there's drayage. So when your gear in the semi gets to a venue, that venue may weigh it and then charge you per pound to bring that gear into the building. And that's an expense that I need to understand. That's what the bill of lading's for. The client often will ask me, well, how much is all your gear going to weigh? And if I have a bill of lading, I can tell them exactly. And also it helps me on the loadout to know how the vendor packed it so that I can pack it and get it back into the truck, or have whoever's there for me pack it and get it into the truck properly, knowing that we didn't leave anything behind. I mean, there's equipment lists and packing lists and all that, but the bill of lading is a great way to save me time understanding weight, because you got to do one on the way out of a venue anyway. So why not know that and have that information? And the cell phone number for the truck drivers, I can't tell you how many times I've had to call my clients, wake them up wherever they are and say, hey, do you got a number for the third truck, the fourth truck? They're not here and nobody seems to know where they are. And inevitably they've usually either gotten stuck in marshaling or they're waiting somewhere they're not supposed to be, but that's key. So there's nothing worse than having 24 union stagehands standing around tapping their toes and your truck is MIA. So don't let that happen. Booth orientation. So we'll talk a little bit about this because I think this is key too. I told you that on my very, very first job, I almost lost it because I had the booth facing the front doors, and I assumed that that's the way it was supposed to be. But actually, the main aisle was the other way. Didn't understand it at the time, so I basically had it backwards. And when the guy showed up, and I'm like, because I was coming from rock and roll, where the faster you get it done, the better. So when I came in, I'm like, I'm done. I'm out of here. He's like, it's facing the wrong way. Change it, or you're going to lose the gig. So that was a long night for me. So orientation, and we're going to break this down a little bit because it's important. And so I'm going to talk about this TDK booth that I did at CES this year. Earlier, I think it was January. I'm losing track of time now. But this booth is in a funky spot, and that's why I'm doing it. This is flow of traffic. This is flow of traffic. This is flow of traffic. But they're surrounded by these huge booths. So I wasn't sure which way the things would go. So I asked several times what's going on and where this thing lives. And this is what they sent me. So I'll talk about orientation, and these are the steps I take. Client renderings and floor plans. So I want to get as much detail as I can. I want to know their vision. I want to know what it's supposed to look like when it's done. Booth orientation, we talked a little about that, but I always ask for a drawing that shows the fabric, the floor plan, and their directionals. So which way this baby's going to go, which way it's going to line up. I need to know that for sure. Clients' hanging points. This is a drawing that shows me where my truss needs to be, basically in orientation to the floor plan, so that I lay my truss out to lift everything. We showed this. This is the floor plan. You can usually get this from show management, or if not, I get it straight from my client. Better to get it from your client because they know what they want. Rigging rules, and I talked a little bit about this. This is kind of just to see. A lot of times there's load weight requirements. There's certain specs that you need to have. Some of your gear needs to be certified. Sometimes they won't even let you bring in outside gear. You have to use their gear because they know it's certified, plus they will bill for it. Building layouts. I have a file full of different venues. But lately I've noticed that it's been harder to get full-size drawings, and I get snapshots over my booth of what beams I can rig on, what their load capacity is, and so on. And so when I was doing this TDK booth, I was looking at this thing and I was trying to figure it out, and there wasn't a key to show me color. So I had to call Freeman and try to figure it all out. And what I did find out is that that you needed spanner truss. And I'm like, uh-oh, now what do I do? And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, because that changed everything. And then power, as I talked to you about power drops. I know I'm going to need power to lift the motors. The client's going to have to pay for that. That's usually a 30 amp system on the floor. But I also know for this particular booth that I needed a 60 amp in the truss. And so I basically am getting an understanding right out of the gate, even during the orientation, where the power is going to be coming from, where it's going to drop into my truss, if we're going to have power on the floor for motors, where is it going to start. And so you can see here a little bit here, this is my 0 point, because this column is where the power was coming from. So I know that the closest corner to the power is this corner. So I basically made that my 0, 0 corner. And then you can see billing for power is expensive. And at the bottom, it says approved, which means that my client decided that they were willing to pay Freeman that amount of money for power. And so I need to make sure that I stay within that and don't go over that, because that would be an add-on cost. Catwalks are great if you want to put your power up in the catwalk. If you want to be able to drop cables down from the catwalk, so on and so forth. But in this particular location, in this gig, there was no catwalk, but there was these air handlers and big obstacles that were in the way. And so these gray trusses are spanner trusses. And we didn't know about that right away. And now this is my truss design that would pick up that big square sign or U-shaped sign, and then this curved sign that was in here. We were just going to do dead hangs from the ceiling. But my client wanted 24 feet of trim height. And with the spanner trusses, the max I could get, the max by burying motors and pushing, was 22 feet. So that was a huge change. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we move into this. But that was a huge change. So I have to confirm this all with the client, right? So confirmation, I'll pound through this. Renderings. Okay, this is what they want their booth to look like. I had to tell them it was going to be a little lower. The lights would be closer to the sign, but we could still get the sign at 20 feet. The truss would just be 2 feet above it instead of 4 feet. Orientation, we know the orientation. I've taken their final drawings and I've laid it in to make sure that they sign off on the fact that this is where it's going to be. And then I have a note in there, move large sign back into booth 1 foot 6 inches so I could get it inside the spanner. The current curved sign can stay if it's needed, so it stays right where they wanted it. But I need them to tell me it's okay to move that big sign in a little bit. And then once again, confirm pick point drawings. I take their pick point drawings and I do my simple pick point drawing. As we get into the design process, I'll explain that a little bit more, but I need them to see that I've taken their pick point drawings and I'm going to use them exactly the way they wanted, minus the slight move about bringing the box in. Trim height issue, we discussed that. So in other words, these lights, I need to show them that instead of being 4 feet above the truss where the lights wouldn't be in the way of the sign, it will be possible that these lights may impede into the sign, and I'll do my very best. So what I ended up doing is taking these 5 lights and top hanging them here, and I out hung all of this stuff. So nothing blocked. It worked out really well for what it was. The rigging plot, I send this to Freeman because this booth was not, they didn't have the money to have a crew there or to send me out early. So I had to rely on Freeman because CES is such a big show. They did this almost a month before the show opened. It's crazy how in advance it was. And my fingers were crossed that when I got there, it would all be in the right spot. So you can see my 5 motor points, there's my 0, 0 point. My power is going to end up right here in the truss. And I don't show spanner truss because it's not my responsibility to tell Freeman how to rig spanner truss. I know what they've got. They've given me a sort of a quick list on where it's how much they need, and I'm going to trust. And I've talked about trim heights. So it's a 20-inch box truss, trims at 22 feet from the floor. That's vital. They never said 100% sure they would do it, but I finally got a hold of a rigger in Vegas that I knew, and he said he would make sure that I had my 22 feet, and I trusted him. Power layout, and I told you guys this is where my power would be. It's closest to that column, and I put a 60 amp up there to run everything, and I had to make sure I stayed within that 60 amps and do the job of light. And the job for lighting was just to light the sign and the curve sign. That's it. I left house lights on, and you know, the rest of the booth was lit ambient, which is what they asked for. The lighting plot is as follows. It's pretty straightforward. I love these Titan high bays. I can talk about them in detail as we move on, but basically they are an LED light, 4 foot long, that are for factories, warehouses. And upstaging helped me design a barn door on one side to keep the overflow of light directed in towards the booth. And I'm so grateful that they helped find those lights, one, and then they were able to modify them so they worked. And I could tie them in series. Boy, I'll tell you, Ryan Bernice can be mad at me that I don't know this, but I think they're like 140 watts a pop. So I can put a bunch together and have them all in, you know, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lights in one circuit. I think that's probably pushing it, but that's what I did. And then, you know, I got Lecos, 750 watt and so on. I'm showing the distances for everything. I want to give them as much detail as possible, since I couldn't be there for most of this. I needed to trust that Freeman was going to get it done. And if I give them as much detail as possible, they did, and they did a great job. So now we're going to get into the meats and potatoes. That's pretty much why we're all here, right? Lighting design. And, you know, but it's important to understand that all that stuff that goes into it before we get started is key. Because if I don't have that information, my client doesn't know, well, a couple things are going to happen. Either I'm going to fail miserably, or my client's going to be really upset that I've charged them, or Freeman or whoever, GES or whoever, is charging them an extra $5,000 for add-ons or things that I missed in the process of power, rigging, lighting, and everything that goes into and above the booth. So here I'm going to once again show you some slides, and I'll just tell you about quickly how I got into the design process of trade shows, and then we'll move right into that, and I won't hold you guys hostage much longer. So in college, I went to college as a graphic artist. I wanted to do album covers, and I realized I wasn't that good of an artist, but I'd always had friends that were in bands or theater. And so I hung around with the theater folk, and I started to learn about angle and light, and I really liked it. And then when I left college, I was doing whatever I could to make money. I was waiting tables, tending bar, but I was always doing lights for bands, you know, buddies or cousins or whatever. And I'd mix sound, or I'd set up the drum set, I'd do whatever was needed, but I always found myself gravitating towards design. So, you know, so after local bands and after breaking fingers and blowing up engines and rental trucks, I went to touring, started at Pete's Lights in the early 80s, and toured for 12 years until about 97 when we had our first child. And so I wanted to get off the road, and I tried television, and I did it. It was great. Television's good if you can get it. I enjoyed it. I worked at NBC for 3 years. And then I got a call from John Bonnick at Upstaging. They needed a corporate lighting designer. My daughter had been born, and my wife was willing to let me leave the house for a little while. I think she actually preferred that I disappear for a little while. So I was hoping I wouldn't travel as much, but as it turned out, I traveled just as much, if not more, in the corporate world. But I loved it, and so I've done corporate theater. I've done all sorts of different things, but I've landed comfortably in trade show booth lighting, and the relationships I started building with Available Light with Steven and Bill there were just getting started last year, and things were really starting to roll until the pandemic hit, and I was really looking forward to working with those guys too. And just, I mean, I was booked in November all the way through 2020, June and July. So I was really excited about what was going on in the trade show industry, and I'm fingers crossed. I'm pretty sure we're going to be back. So procedures for booth lighting. So the short story is I fell into it. It started with rock and roll and then ended up here, and super grateful and super lucky to have the gig that I have. So we're going to knock through all of these relatively quickly, but I want to break it down real quick for you. Align show floor plans, clients' booth drawings, ask for clean top plan views, building riggable beams and layouts. We'll talk about that. Scale all layers and classes so they match. Arrange drawings in proper size plotter paper. Simple booth space directional layouts. Simple 3D product walls and displays, simple hanging scenic signs and canopies. We talked a little bit about that, but the reason I say simple but 3D is because I want to be able to manipulate my drawings, and I don't want them to get slowed down by seriously detailed 3D rendering drawings. Video and audio, additional items that are going to go in the truss, 3D truss configurations to lift the booth properties and lights, achieving as many dead hangs as possible. We'll talk about that. 3D lighting placements, starting with clients' most important properties they want lit. That's key, right? What am I there for? I'm there to light what the client wants lit, and I have to start with that. Apply all important fixture and wiring information to the plot, title block, and with all the pertinent information needed. And I do my own title blocks. We'll talk about that a little bit. Vectorworks that I use has a great title block system that does a lot of calculations. Mine kind of does, but not really. But I like my title block. I've gotten comfortable with it. So we'll talk about that. So it's the aligning of the floor plan. So here's your floor plan that I get from show management. The booth that we're going to be talking about is one of my larger booths. It's at RSNA. It's the Siemens booth. It is this booth here. This is the floor plan from RSNA, and this is the load-in schedule. We'll talk about why that's important too. And the blue booths are the ones that usually get hit first, according to this, then the red booths and so on. So that's good to know. That's information needed. And then I take the floor plan that Catalyst exhibits. Rich Korth is my main client there. Working with Gino from Nth Degree and Nancy Gelford from Catalyst to sort of follow their lead. They're my main people. Those three people are the ones that will tell me what to do, make or break my day, and keep me in line. So now I go to McCormick Place. I have this file. McCormick Place is in Chicago. I live in Chicago. I've got most of the drawings of the building. Sometimes I call the Freeman guys, Mike and Ryan and those guys, and they'll give me more detail on what they've changed or what I need to know about load weights. But this is the North Hall at McCormick Place. Now I'm going to put all those together so I can see how my booth sits, where it lives, the orientation of it, and where the beams are overhead. It's extremely important for me to understand this going in so that I know how to design my truss layout. So layers and classes, so they match. Basically, this is common sense stuff if you're a drafter, but this looks like it's in 1/8 scale, and it just shows me all my layers, and starting with the way I lay things out. This is pretty common. These are probably more layers than I would normally use on a booth because we do get into such detail on this. It's a relatively large booth, so there's a little more detail. Plus, I'm talking with my master electrician, Ryan Berniasen from Upstaging, and Matt Bilek, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm doing things in a way that they then can take the drawings and manipulate them as well. They take them and go into much more detail than I do. this just shows what I was just saying. It looks like I'm in 1/8 scale equals a foot. This is a top plan view. This is how many revisions I done. I don't charge by revision. Some people do. That's part of my pre-production, and I keep track of it. The final drawing was done on 11/19/19, and that's information in my title block. So arrange drawings on proper size plotter paper. I know that sounds silly, but if you want to look professional, then you want to make sure that you have access to a plotter and you have access to making it look as good as possible. I know that this is my paper here. I think it's Architectural D, which I like because it's not too big. So I can see that the way that I've laid this out, I've got a lot of space at the bottom of this drawing. That's where my title block will end up going. So it'll be a horizontal instead of a vertical title block. I know that, and then I can work with the drawing, and I can take views, snapshots, whatever I want of that drawing now that it's laid out, and I can print out plots as needed as we move along. This explains all that, and I'll get into this in a second. It shows the size and the width of Architectural D. It's kind of boring, but it's important to know. This is the new crew room at Upstaging. This is Architectural D, and this is the way I have it oriented. I have it left to right. So I know that I can talk to that printer. I always start every booth with the simple, after I've gotten everything from the client, with a simple 2D layout of the booth. This shows the orientation, center line, and so on. I know right now that this is north, but I'll add it into the title block so that everybody else knows it's north. I'll add in my client's layout to mine, and I'm going to start drawing in little 3D. I use green as the low layer. I don't know why I started doing that. Maybe it's green as grass. But I show that in green so that I can manipulate this quicker. That drawing, just that simple drawing that I got from the client, was huge. And every time I wanted to look at it in an isometric view, it would chug. So when I break it down into simple blocks, it still does everything I needed to do. It shows me the walls I need. It shows me the machines and things that I need to light, but I can zip through a drawing super quick. So now I'm going to talk about hanging signs in the booth. The client's going to send me a drawing with their pick points. I lay that over my layout, which is my orientation layout, which is my base. I see I've got a boatload of pickup points on this booth. So I've got to think first about how I'm going to do that. And so I'll take their drawing, which is not too big. It's only 2D, and I'll make it 3D of all their pick points. And then I'll make that nice and clean. I'll get rid of their stuff and I'll show it in 3D so that I can show the clients and manipulate it, what they're trying to get across. I've always done scenic hanging stuff in orange. I'm not sure why. Once again, maybe because it's Catalyst colors, maybe because it's Siemens colors. I don't know why, but I always have. It works for me. And I've always done video in purple. Don't know why, but I do. It works for me, and that's the video wall that's going to hang. And you can see that I got a challenge right now because I've got a huge canopy that is literally connected to this video wall. So it's going to be interesting on how we're going to lift that. And those are going to be several questions that I'm going to work with the video guy, Frank Sinise, and try to figure that all out. So now we're showing simple 3D drawings of the video, audio, and additional items. So now I'm adding in whatever I need to add in. This comes usually later, but I try to get the information as soon as I can because I know that I'm going to have speakers. They told me that there's going to be some presentation in the front of the booth, but they haven't told me what it's going to be yet. Frank has told me that he's got some spy cams. Gino wants me to make sure that I put them in the right location and that I drop power for them so he doesn't have to worry about that. So I show a cable path for video, where it's going to go so that it goes down in the closet. I show some notes to make sure that they know that this is going to hang 4 feet below the truss and so on. All information that can change, but at least I'm covering my back. In the process of configuring everything to lift the booth, you see what I've got to lift, right? This is basically the booth and what I'm lifting. There's no lights yet. I know that there's product, but now I'm going to have to start laying in truss. And I want to lay in truss so that I'm primarily covering all the things that need to be lifted. So you know that this truss is, you know that this truss is, and I'm going to show you some more in a minute. And I know this truss is, and I know I got a bunch of pipes, because they would rather pay for hanging some pipes than to run another, whatever, 30 something motors, which take almost an hour to rig a piece, and put me in a pretty bad spot as far as bridles and all the time. So I'm going to hang 2 long trusses and then hang a bunch of pipe, and it worked out pretty darn good. And then this shows some more truss work. They called me and said, we're adding this entertainment thing in the front. So I added a little truss here. I added this, and I'll get into some detail. I added these 2 little trusses because these are the 2 main machines that they wanted to do strobing and pyro and smoke and this huge reveal. And I'm like, okay. So I just threw in some trusses to get ready, and then I label everything. So they understand when I say, you know, X truss, B truss, C truss, all that, they know what I'm talking about. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's just a simple labeling system. I do it this way because I have bad eyes. I can see this. And then I'm able to show the client real quick what I'm going to do. And I can flip around really fast and show them heights and trim heights and so on. And so we talked about dead hangs. We talked about how it's almost an hour a motor. I mean, it's better than that on RSNA because we have a big crew and then we got a solid crew, but there's a lot going on here. I mean, this is a 300-foot by 80-foot booth. So it's a football field of lights. And so you're talking, you know, 100 and something motors. So I show you this because I want you to see it if you can. And this is those long trusses over the canopy with those pipes that haven't gone on yet. But I use HUD truss. Even though there's only a light maybe every 15 feet, it's a huge time saving to have upstaging put everything in the shop, in the truss, and then bring it to me. The wheels go off and clip on, and you can see that almost all of these are dead hangs. There's a few bridles, but not too many. Almost everything is a dead hang. And that's going to save time, and that's going to save money, and that's going to assure that I get the trim heights that I need to get there. So now achieving those dead hangs. You'll see what I've got. You'll see the beams. You'll see my points are hitting almost all dead hangs. There are some bridles, and you'll see these. So once they started adding stuff, I circled these because I was doing load calcs, and these were coming in my calculations as being too high, weighing too much for the area. So I had questions, and I knew I would need to ask my crew and Freeman what to do. And I think we ended up adding a motor here and adding a motor here. I don't know if we added a motor here or not, but they were starting to throw the load calcs that Vectorworks was giving me off, and I was starting to get nervous that I couldn't achieve these dead hangs. And as it turned out, we needed to add motors, but better to do it in front. And then I show the motors and their trim heights and everything in there. You can see these are the ones that I was concerned about, but this is what we've got, and this is where we're heading with motor layout. And primarily, I would say 80% of the rig was all dead hangs, which was great. This is that special area. I'll just talk briefly on this because, you know, I loved it. It was really cool, but it was added on at the last minute. And this did change a lot of what we were doing and the way we were going to lift everything. And they asked me to create a blackout drape. So what they wanted is they had video content that had a slow teal lines running, and they wanted me to do that. So we were going to hang video tiles. And it was too expensive and it was too heavy. So we ended up using X-Bar 20s. And this is kind of convoluted, but it gives you an idea of what I showed them. So these are the X-Bar 20s. This is X-Grid. This is the O-Truss and the P-Truss for their displays. And this is showing now that we reconfigured these trusses from going this way to going this way. And we lift this canopy. And then I would pre-rig motors in this truss to lift the video wall. So it could all be together seamlessly. And that's a topic for another day on what we did to do that. But it shows you that I needed 200 amps here, 100 amps here, this and that there. And so this is why these areas started increasing in weight as we were well into the design process, because this front of the booth was becoming exciting. It was really cool. I'm going to show you some pictures that give you an idea, and then I'll show you a little video because I was pretty proud of it. This is the video content, and this is our X-Bar 20s. And Matt Bialik just he used MA and he did an animation in the console that pretty much followed this look that the video wall was doing with the ceiling that we created, and getting the proper distance between the bottom of the light and the canopy was key to make it look pretty much like the video. And you can see that we had a presenter under there. So how the heck am I going to make sure she's popping and she's underneath a black canopy that's below the truss? So yay, challenges, but we got there. We just used some drop arms. Here's a quick little video. I think it'll play for me. Let me see if it does. It's not a great video because I did it on my phone, but you can see how slow everything moves. This will give you a little idea that she's lit, she's popping. The lights that I had to drop down were there, but you can see that it's sort of tied in with content, and that's key, right? That we're gonna understand content and go with it. So now we're gonna start placing lights, which is what we've all been waiting for. And so we can see here, what I do is I put in focus lines. What is most important to the client is this header. This header lives in here. So I have a truss out here that's going to light it, and I have this truss in here. That primarily, those are the only two trusses. Well, maybe I added this one here. Those are the only trusses I added that didn't lift a property that the client needed lifted. So I don't have a lot of wasted space. I don't have a lot of extra motors for lighting, but they're definitely in the right spot to light this header and to light all the product. And then this is the reception desk. This is how I got in underneath there. So I'm using focus lines so I know what real estate I'm going to be taking on the truss. So I know that my priority is the signs, then the machines, and then the walls, and so on. So once I've done all that, I can start into anything else, like underneath this canopy, adding in stuff. And this truss was primarily added for audio, but it ended up becoming a nice, I'll show you a close up, a nice add-on for lighting. So I put in some extra lights in here. I had a lot of audio hanging there. These are T-pipes, all these with the red lines, and so they can get underneath the canopy and light the talent. And this is one of those trusses that I'll show you in detail. And so then I show the client, because especially Frieder in Germany, they want to know that the truss isn't going to block any of their signage and so on. And once again, we've got a big system. So I'm just showing them a quick front view, showing them that the lights are above all their scenic elements, and so that we can move forward with that. Apply important fixtures and wiring information. So like I could go into, before I move on this, I could go into the design process in detail of exactly what I do, but it's the same as anybody would design. But for me, it's just understanding what the client wants lit first, so that the real estate on the truss that I take is in perfect position for their main items. General booth lighting will come, of course, eventually. I think I have a note here. So as explained during the budget process, I already have a solid idea of what fixtures I will be using and what most important to light as far as the clients are concerned. In some cases, it's not just the products and displays, but branding, company name, taglines, and etc. Therefore, I need to know exactly where all these things are going to go in space. Sometimes the clients will move a tagline or a logo and not think it's important to let me know. So I'm extremely diligent in asking my client to send me new renderings if anything moves. And I can't tell you how important that is, because we might be in the design process for a month and they may move some like a wall or a tagline because somebody asked them to do it, and they might forget to tell me. And now I've got a light on that truss to light that tagline. And now I have to get a union crew to bring a boom lift in and to move that light 4, 5, 10 feet over to grab that tagline. So I want to know exactly what's going on with them, so that I'm moving lights as they're moving signage. Once the products, displays, company logos are all accounted for, I'll double check everything with the client to see if there's any presenters in the booth and that they need light. So I might need a special for a person talking. If so, they may require a more theatrical approach, and I apply that from what I learned in theater, which is just some black light some fill light and some key light, and I try to work that into a trade show booth, which is a very big and active space. And so there you go. So, I mean, basically those are my notes. At last, I'll draw the general booth lighting. I will use the remaining truss space for this. With any automated system, it is easier than with a conventional system. And that's obvious because I can roll around with a console on a wheels and program around whatever. If they move something on the floor, a machine or a display, I can move the light from the ground. It is way more cost effective. Even though it costs more for equipment on the front end, on the back end, it is way more affordable for me to have an automated system so I don't have to keep sending up a union crew in a bucket truck for a few hours to move some lights in the air. So now we're labeling. Gino, who I explained is in charge of this booth. He is with Nth Degree, and he is meticulous on how this thing goes. And so what he's done over the years is he's given me a system. He tells me what he wants in first and how many motors. And then I can coordinate through him with the riggers what motors and what areas need to be addressed first, then second, and then third, which is some of this little stuff, and then fourth, this outside. So basically, I'm allowing him the ability to kind of work right behind me. So once this huge canopy is up, he can build it and go. And then he can start building the second story deck underneath it. So the last thing I need to do to Gino is to hold him up. So his information is vital. And he tells you 21 motors, 18 motors, 34 motors, and I don't know, 14 motors. Those are the motors in the time, and usually 2 days, 2.5 days to get that done. So, 100 something motors to get done in 3 days at McCormick Place and not hold up the scenic build is key. I cannot go into the third day or even the 2.5 day and keep them from doing their job, or they won't get it done in time. And then I'm in trouble. So having a detailed idea and showing them how it's going to go is key. And then this is that center area. You can see in a little more detail what we're trying to do there. I want the client to understand, and I label these things in such a way that I can do that ribbon chase that we were doing. And I know the numbers, and my crew at Upstation can take this, and then they can add everything they need to do data-wise. It shows me here, these numbers here. One is a fogger, and these are strobes, the strobes that are on and stay lit. It's awesome. I go into a little detail on that. And then this is basic booth design work here. I've broken this in half. You can see my labeling, the audio, these trusses, everything's here. It shows my cable path. This is how I do it. Now, I'm blessed on this show that I don't have to show multi-placement. I don't have to do all that stuff. I show the guys where the signs are going to drop, power to the signs, and so on. But they go and they figured it all out, and it's a wiring. To me, it's a nightmare. For them, I think they enjoy doing it. This shows fixtures, and in this case, I'm looking over here because I'm looking at my big screen. This is a Martin Mac Viper profile. I use these all the time, especially on the canopies. It tells me I'm using it as a canopy. It tells me it's wattage. It's truss I. Now my guys have gone in and they've told me that it's even though it's my number is 304, they've called it 42. It's in universe 22, whatever this means, U dimmer, whatever that means to Ryan, that's his information. Let me click on this. And then more information about the field angle, which is just the way that Vectorworks does it. The weight of the fixture, which is key in figuring out load weights. Once again, it's a Viper, it's a Martin fixture. Its user address is 22/246. That means something to Ryan. And thank God it means something to him. And then we go down, universe address 22, absolute address, don't have a clue, DMX address, so on and so forth. But Ryan does, and he's figured out all his necessary wiring. Title block configuration. So I told you I do my own. I keep it real simple. I like it this way. I have calculations that I keep on a different sheet, but I don't think the client needs to see all that. So it's Siemens, it's RSNA, it's McCormick Place, it's the booth number, it's the hall number, it's the dates, it's me, it's my name, it's the truss and lighting is the layout that you're looking at. And this particular drawing was a top plan view in A scale. It shows how many revisions, and the final, it shows my client, which is Catalyst, and Rich Course information if you need to get a hold of him, and the vendor, Upstaging, and John Bonnick's information if you need to get a hold of him, information on trim heights, a little picture of the booth. And then on the other side that it goes down, more information. I will go into all this, but it's everything. Rear canopy 7 feet from the bottom of the HUD truss. All this information is important to my crew, to Freeman, my client, not so much, but to the people that actually have to build the booth, very important. I break down every truss with the trim heights. I wanted to know from the top of the trim to the bottom of the trim heights, so that when we start rigging, we know there's no issues. I know that I've got 21 tons and 67 half tons in this. I know this is my truss counts, and this is coming from Upstaging, this is coming from Freeman, yada, yada, yada. These are all the fixtures that I use. And once again, I think that what's important to remember is that we could spend another hour on talking about design concepts and what fixtures to use. I love Martin. I use them as much and often. They are my workhorse. I use them for everything when it comes to framing, to gobos, and or to general booth light. The majority of the booth is lit with Mac Auras and Rovi Spiders, and I love them. They do the job. This is that special effects area with the X bars, the GLP strobes, the Atari M7 LED fogger. So in other words, they wanted pyro and CO2, but we couldn't get the okay from McCormick Place. So these Antares are pretty good at of doing of like a stream of smoke downward. And they have lights built into them, although they're iffy, they still work. And then I had to make sure that I had the 10 power cans from Freeman, and I showed them where I wanted to hang them. I'm going to show you some pictures of the booth after it was done. And I'm very proud of this. I think that everybody works so hard on this thing. And these aren't renderings. I mean, this is actually the booth taken by my client, pictures, and it's exactly the way the renderings looked. I mean, very proud of the way that turned out. Couldn't be more grateful to everybody that I worked with doing it. And I'll end with this little slideshow. It shows a few more pictures of Siemens booths that I do, and I'll just use my this for a closing statement, and you got some gratuitous photos of other work. You know, we could, like I said, we could talk about design work, basic fixtures used, why, mood of the booth, color gobo, color temperatures, effects, and video content, and talking with video content for hours. But once we have developed some minor skills and we have a good eye, we've made a great start. However, the relationships are what matter. I'm truly grateful to have worked with alongside some of the kindest and most talented people in our industry. Goes without saying, I could not have done this without any of them. And they know who they are because I emailed them all to let them know that this was happening and that their names might be mentioned. And once again, I'm so lucky to be in this industry, and I'm so grateful to Martin Harmon for putting this on and giving me a platform and something to do during COVID, because I have been squirrely. So that's really all I've got. I thank you so much for listening.
Hey, Mike, we did have a couple questions if you have some time.
Without a doubt.
Perfect. The first question is, hey, Mike, who turns your lights on and off every day?
So there's a couple different ways to do that. That's probably coming from my video director, because I've actually paid them on certain booths to, since they're in there in the morning, sometimes I'll go in to turn it on, but they'll turn it off for me. But usually there's a guy that's on the booth. Now there's times when we have queues to run, and either I or my programmer will have to be in the booth to make sure that happens. But for the most part, I've been blessed to work with some video guys that I can wrangle in to either turning on or turning off my booth for me. It usually costs me, dinner and drinks, something like that. But somebody always has to be on site.
Perfect. The next question is a two-parter. If there is such a thing as an average size trade show booth, what is the common amount I should think of regarding the lighting budget? And how do I know what amount to tell the client so they know what to expect?
So that's a fair question and almost impossible to answer. So let's just say you're doing a 40-40 booth, and it really depends on what they need lifted, right? So is your job solely to light the booth, or is your job also to lift their scenic elements, and they're creative, they're branding. And in that case, you have a little bit more leeway because you're doing two things. You're lighting the booth and you're lifting their products. So there is no set number. I can tell you that the most expensive thing in creating a budget is travel expenses. So you got to look at that, right? So you got to think how many guys, how much truck, and all that. And if I said $20,000 was a good starting point for any booth, I would probably be close. But I got a strong feeling that when we all get back to work after this long break, the budgets are going to be a little different, possibly a little tighter. Things will have changed. So you have to be flexible and you have to be willing to listen. And if the guy says, I've only got 10 grand to spend on this booth for lighting, then I'll ask a question, 10 grand for lights. And then how much for the truss, to lift your signs, because that's different, right? And he'll say, nope, 10 grand to lift the truss, lift the signs, lift the lights for you, for your guys, everything. And then I've got to figure out how to do that. So there is not one set number for any booth at any time, in my belief. You've got to be flexible.
Great. The next question is, at what stage of the client's booth design process do they typically bring in a lighting designer, and how much ability do you have to move scenic elements if needed?
So usually I'm brought in once the design concept is done. Very rarely, and it does happen, they'll bring me in for ideas and thoughts, but that's not my job. They're creating the booth and they're selling it to their main client, the top end client, the name that's on the booth. So what'll happen in the conversation is do you want this booth lit? Is usually what a producer from an exhibit house will say, or the client may say, we want this sign to stand out. Those words might happen in a conversation, and then I'll get the call. But they'll always have a concept. They'll always have a rendering. They'll always have a plan. And I have very, very little control over moving anything. I fight real hard with Siemens because, and I don't mean fight in a bad way. I try to explain to them that they want their signs lit white. If you see any of those renderings, that's not easy to do. That's a 300-foot long sign that's lit with 80 fixtures, and each fixture has a hotspot, so it's taken a long time to come up with a way of lighting that is smooth. So I always ask Rich Korth and Frieder if I can move that sign into the booth a little bit more. I think the minimum distance is 14 feet from the end of the light to the fabric to get enough distance to get enough spread to light something smooth. So I will only interject on moving anything if I think that I can't achieve it because it's too close to an aisle or it's blocked by something else. Otherwise, that's not up to me. That's up to them.
Great. The next question is, how often do venue house lights or other booth lighting effects interfere with your lighting design, and how do you solve these problems?
That's a great question because it's funny. And I mean that sincerely. I mean, that is always an issue. I'm blessed. I don't design anymore for me. I design for the people around me because I know that those other lighting guys are going to be looking at my booth and judging it. Oh, look at that, there's a burnout, or that doesn't look right. And I do the same thing. I look at my neighbors and most of them I know. So if there's a light or a strobe or some effect or something coming from a video wall that's flashing into the booth, I usually don't say anything until my client says something to me. And then I'll go directly to the lighting designer, not the crew, not the master electrician, but the designer, if I can find them. And I'll ask them, I go, this is what's coming down the road. This is the train I see coming. What can we do about it? And 90% of the time, they'll just say, oh, here, and they'll move it. And it's done. If it's a big video wall effect, they may say, hey, right now, we're not even close. We're running it full. By the time we start the show, it'll be running at 10%. It shouldn't be an issue. And so then I make notes and I walk with my client to where those issues were, let's just say on Friday, and come Monday, I'll walk with my client and see if there's still an issue. And if they are, I'll go back. But it's just a conversation, and you try not to be too bullish about it because I might have a light that's shining in their booth that I need there. and it's hard for me to move because it'll affect the way my booth looks. So it's a give and take.
Perfect. The next question is, how do Union City's labor costs adapt to your budget?
They are the budget, right? So my, whatever you want to call it, $20,000 on a big booth is small in comparison to coming into New York to Javits or Chicago, McCormick, or wherever, Philly for that matter. Philly's one of the harder places I've had to work because there's so many unions in there. In Philly, you've got the Teamsters at the dock, then you've got a crew that takes it from the dock to a yellow line inside the building, and then another union comes and picks it up from that yellow line and brings it into your booth, that where you can, then you're working with your stagehands in the booth. So there's 4 unions that are involved before I'm even using the riggers and the stagehands to hang the lights. So I stay out of that, and I purposely stay out of the billing for the budget for the unions and the drayage costs and all that stuff. And I try to stay out of it completely so that my client's dealing with that. So there's not 2 numbers coming, or there's not 2 people talking. But my guess is if I'm at $20,000, there's 3 or 4 times that for a booth. It's just the way it is.
Great. The next question is there a dress code for trade show lighting designers when meeting in person with corporate clients?
Well, of course. So I mentioned I got off the road touring, where I often and only wore shorts and a black t-shirt. And I wear that on the show floor when I'm working, but when I'm meeting clients, that picture of me up there on the screen is as best dressed as you're ever going to see me. I'm not a big tie and suit jacket guy, but when it calls for, I will. And I'll always ask dress code, and my clients will tell me. It's usually it's what I'm wearing here, a button-up shirt, a pullover, either nice jeans or khakis. It's common sense, right? I'm not showing up to a corporate client meeting in a concert tee, skinny puppy concert t-shirt and some ripped torn shorts, professional.
Perfect. The next question is, how often are you working with video as part of your design, and do you use media servers for this?
Yes, and all the time. And I say all the time in the bigger booths, all the time. Now, I think it's cool because I think the industry's heading that way, and I think that that's going to be more of what's involved. And I call that specialist. I'm not a media server guy, and I don't claim to be. And I'm not a content designer, and I don't claim to be. My job is to look at the creative, and I once again try to do this right off the bat. If I know that the color scheme of a booth in this particular case is green and blue, and I know that the content that they're going to be delivering me is green and blue, and I know that they want some of their canopies lit, I know that I'm going to use the green and blue scheme. At least I'm just going to start that way. But when it comes to media, there's a lot of guys involved, right? There's content builders, there's media server guys, there's designers, there's video technicians, and so on. So in this particular Siemens booth that I showed you, I've got more involved than I normally do because I know that the ceiling that holds the video wall are all tied together, and that the way that it looks should be tied together. So there's a very detailed conversation early on about what we're going to try to do. Even though that was added in late, let me see if I can click on this and show you. Even though that was added in late, I'm able to coordinate that. Let's see if this works. Okay, this did work. So, and this is a perfect example. Their marketing was blue. So I went with blue here. Let me click on this real quick, and it may not hold. I don't think I can get it to hold. But there's the moving balls and stuff. So then they were in orange. So everything was done in orange. So that's all video. That even in the kinetic balls, that's all done by a media server, and it's done by a separate crew. And I need to know that. I need to coordinate with it. So depends on the size of the booth, but always coordinating, and always have a media server guy in my back pocket in case I need him.
Great. It looks like we have one more question, and that is, what software platforms are key tools for you?
So I have 2 tools that are the main tools, I think, for most guys, but certainly for me. It's Vectorworks, which so with Vectorworks, I have a contract, a yearly contract. I think I'm paying close to $500 a year to get their software updates and whatever they do, which is, I think, a completely fair price for what they have. It's extremely powerful drafting software, and I do everything in there. Heck, I even do furniture layouts for my house in Vectorworks so that I can show my wife where I think the couch needs to be moved to. I mean, I'm a little crazy that way, but Vectorworks is the tool that I use to do all my drafting, and I'm able to do renderings from it. So I can start, if I do something in 3D, I can use RenderWorks and have a nice enough rendering to show a client what it's going to look like. If I have to take it to the next step, I can drop that into a Cinema 4D or some other drafting program, but it'll take it. And then my MacBook Pro, damn, that are expensive. I mean, Macs are expensive, but they're easy to use. They're fast. They're reliable. So it's pretty much Vectorworks and my MacBook Pro and my backpack with some tape measures and a light meter. That's me. I mean, I'm a business of one, and I rely on unions and independents and everybody else to help me to make it happen.
Great. Well, that looks like all the questions we have. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And thanks, Mike, for this presentation. It was a great one.
Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. That was excellent. Really enjoyed
Thanks, Brad.
it.
I didn't have to call on you.
No, you did great. I knew you would.
Thanks.
I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.